May the words of my mouth and thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Shalom and welcome all to our ongoing classes in the series which I've entitled How to Live a Godly Life, Legends of the Talmud. The practical, natural, down-to-earth, wise advice that our sages have given us for posterity. I am, of course, your host, Ariel Tzadok. You find me online at KosherTorah.com. Well, this class is actually part 2 in our series about dreams and their interpretations. Our text material in the Talmud is from Tractate Berakhot, and we are using the English translation by Rabbi Finkel. And this version is on page 53. So I said we're in part 2 of this series, so we're picking up right in the middle. We discussed all things about dreams. One which was a very important point was how dreams always follow their interpretations. And that's exactly what we're going to pick up on in this series, in this class tonight, on the subject of a specific man in Old Jerusalem whose name is Berakhot, who was a professional interpreter of dreams. Now, before I go into what the Talmud says, I want to actually introduce you into some of the psychological foundations to understanding dreams and how we understand that dream interpretation should never be considered or delegated into the realm of mysticism. Frankly, I don't find anything mystical about dream interpretation at all. I believe it is completely psychological. Then again, as far as I'm concerned, Kabbalah is completely psychological, as is prophecy, as is meditation, because psychological means having to deal with the mind. The mind is the soul. The mind is what connects us beyond the limitations of our physical self into a greater reality. And as such, this is the language of that. We have, as we very well know, a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. Now, you and I right now focus on living in this sensory world. And therefore the conscious mind is everything, and the unconscious mind is nothing, and who cares, right? Well, wrong. I want to share with you some of the insights from a very famous Jewish psychologist. This is a man who was not a religious Jew at all. He's a German Jew. His name is Erich Fromm. He is most famous for a book called The Art of Loving. Highly recommended reading. There are teachings from either Erich Fromm or even Carl Jung. Gosh, I wish that we would have an audience that would be willing to sit and actually read and learn these materials together, because I consider their insights so profound that they're truly worthy of our efforts and investment, and in my opinion, a part of learning Torah. We have to really expand the understanding meaning of Torah beyond it being just limited to a specific book. But anyway, Erich Fromm, one of his other books here is called The Forgotten Language, which is an introduction to the understanding of dreams, fairy tales, and myths. And in the chapter called The Nature of Dreams, I just want to share with you a little bit that he has here to say on page 29. With relationship to what we call the conscious and unconscious. This is important because remember, a dream, like we learned, a dream uninterpreted is like a message, a letter unread. In other words, if you don't know how to understand a dream and what precisely it's saying, then what good is it to have? To which you might respond, well, who needs them? Well, apparently, according to our psychological studies, everybody dreams. One way or another, whether or not you remember, it's another story. But the mind is as active in what we call sleep as it is when we are awake. And it's a part of necessary psychological and mental stability and clarity that this occurs. So it's biological. It's part of our makeup, not only physically, biologically, physiologically, but also psychologically and spiritually. So therefore, to pay attention to this, in quote, other side of consciousness is a vital necessity for our human growth. Dr. Fromm writes again from his book, Forgotten Language, chapter Nature of Dreams, page 29, and I quote, "Consciousness is the mental activity in our state of being preoccupied with external reality, with acting. The unconscious is the mental experience in a state of existence in which we have shut off communications with the outer world and no longer preoccupied with action, but with our self-experience." What is reality? You have the likes of Freud, who would say all reality is all external, and anything in the unconscious is only external content which has been repressed out of consciousness. Carl Jung brings a point that if that were true, that the entire unconscious is only repressed stuff, then through appropriate psychoanalysis, we should be able to have total recall and total access of all memory, which of course we know does not happen, which is again one of the major components why Jung did not accept Freud's beliefs, but was able to discover what we call the collective unconscious. But we'll get to that later. Self-experience. We exist up and above and beyond our relationship with the world around us. Now, actually, one of the last books Dr. Fromm wrote here was called To Have or To Be. And it was a very interesting premise, where he questioned, how does one identify oneself? Do you identify yourself with relation to what you have? Or do you identify yourself in relation to who you are? Now, if you think about this, because again, these are the kind of messages that come through in dreams. What I have a title. I am a rabbi, or I am a doctor, I am a lawyer. Well, what would I be if I were not any of those titles? Well, I am a husband, I am a father. Well, what would I be if I did not have any of those titles? Well, I am a Homo sapien male. I am an American. I am this, I am that. What would happen if I had none of those titles? Who would I be? Now don't go schlepping off this question. You stop and ask yourself right now. If you're listening to this recording, you pause it. I dare you to answer it. Those of you live, do you want to dare answer in our text here? Who are you? Any answer you give is obviously going to be wrong, because you are trying to identify an element and an aspect of self, which by definition is above words, beyond words. You see, the unconscious is not just repressed consciousness. As Jung brings out in other places, it's the elements that have not yet or have ever reached consciousness. Kind of like the ocean. When you take your hand and dip it into the water, you touch the surface of the ocean. You can sink your hand down, but how far down does the water go? Obviously a whole lot farther than does your arm. So is the human mind. As deep as we will delve to go in, there are so many layers upon layers that we can never touch. Now, moving right along. This is the area of self-experience. Dr. Fromm continues, and again I quote, "The unconscious is an experience related to a special mode of life, that of non-activity, and the characteristics of the unconscious follow from the nature of this mode of existence. The qualities of consciousness, on the other hand, are determined by the nature of action and by the survival function of the waking state of consciousness. But the unconscious is the unconscious only in relation to what we call, in quote, the normal state of activity. When we speak of the unconscious, we really say only that an experience is alien to that frame of mind which exists while, and as we act, it is then felt as a ghost-like intrusive element, hard to get hold of and hard to remember. But the day world, right now what we're thinking, is as unconscious in our sleep experience as the night world is in our waking experience. This is echoing the ancient teachings of the Taoist master Zhuangzi, who said, "Once I slept and dreamed I was a butterfly. It was so vivid and real that when I awoke I wondered, was I now a man who had wakened from a dream that I was a butterfly? Or am I truly a butterfly who's presently dreaming that I am a man?" How many of us have ever had a dream which was so real that you didn't even know that you were asleep or dreaming, that you were actually there? I know I've had many a dream like this, but then I train myself in dreams. I've had dreams where literally I've gone places, I've seen things, and I've had conversations with whoever, whatever was there, saying I didn't want to go back. And I was told I had to. Now, a skeptic would say to me, that's all in your mind. To which I respond, but of course it is. Where else do you think it is? In my pinky? In my foot? But being in my mind does not mean that it has no reality. By all means it has a reality. The unconscious is only unconscious from the conscious point of view. It is an even more valid reality. Just like all the reality in the depth of the sea. When I look at the surface of the ocean, how deep do I see compared to how deep there is and everything down there? Just because I don't see it, oh my goodness, what's going on? We can not even imagine to this very day, with what is revealed in modern science, what's actually in reality going on below the surface of the oceans. We just don't know. So, the term unconscious is customarily used solely, I'm quoting Dr. Fromm, the term unconscious is customarily used solely from the standpoint of day experience, and thus it fails to denote that both conscious and unconscious are only different states of mind, referring to different states of existence. So again, even though we might be, if you will, prejudiced more to one side than the other, gee, isn't that the story of our lives? We don't understand the unconscious. And it's because we do not understand the unconscious, we don't understand the language of the depth of the ocean. All we know is to breathe air. We don't know what it's like to breathe water, live water under that type of life. It's a completely different form of life. Think about this. Are you consciously aware that when we, in our waking state, we live here on the earth and we walk through the air all the time? Are we not aware of air? Yes, we are. Do you think any aquatic life is aware that they're in water? Do you think they have any conscious awareness that there's a difference between water and air? Maybe some of the mammalians, dolphins, orcas, and the like. But how about other fish that live their entire life? There are realms and strata in the unconscious which are fundamentally different. And unless we explore inner space, we will never, ever grasp the meaning of these things. This is important to understand within the context here of how Ben Hedya could be a dream interpreter. And now, I will share with you, it says here, if you paid, he gave you a favorable interpretation, but if you did not pay, he gave you an unfavorable interpretation. Now you might ask, who cares? Right? So what? I only gave him $10 as opposed to $100. What do I care what he says? Well, apparently, what Ben Hedya said came true. Now, you and I might ask, well, how is that possible? What psychic, intuitive, clairvoyant, mystical insight did he have? The answer is none. Now I will explain to you how dreams work, because this is important to understand. Okay? First of all, let me share with you some insights from Carl Jung. And then we can put this into a context. Because again, I must emphasize, there is nothing mystical and magical about Bar Hedya being able to A, interpret a dream, or B, the fact that it would actually come true in accordance to how much he paid you. Remember, we learned earlier that 24 dream interpreters, professional dream interpreters in Jerusalem. And it said there once about Rabbi Bisna that he went, it says in Rabbi Bana, that he went to 24 different guys, and each gave a different interpretation. They all came true. Because it says all dreams follow the mouth of the interpreter. How psychologically is that possible? This is what we're going to understand now. I'm going to quote to you from a little book from my old days in learning at the Jungian Institute called the C.G. Jung Lexicon, a primer of terms and concepts. It was written by Darrell Sharp, page 47, on the topic of dreams. Dreams, according to Carl Jung, are independent, spontaneous manifestations of the unconscious. They are fragments of involuntary psychic activity, just conscious enough to be reproducible in the waking state. And he here quotes from Jung himself. Dreams are neither deliberate nor arbitrary fabrications. They are natural phenomena which are nothing other than what they pretend to be. They do not deceive, they do not lie, they do not distort or disguise. They are invariably seeking to express something that the ego does not know and does not understand. In other words, it's an attempt to communicate. In symbolic form, dreams picture the current situation in the psyche from the point of view of the unconscious, trying to show us something from a different point of view. Since the meaning of most dreams is not in accord with the tendencies of the conscious mind, but shows particular deviations, we must assume that the unconscious, the matrix of dreams, has an independent function. Carl Jung says, this is what I call the autonomy of the unconscious. The dream not only fails to obey our will, but very often stands in flagrant opposition to our conscious intentions. Jung acknowledged that in some cases, dreams have a wish-fulfilling and sleep-preserving function, like Freud said, or are revealed infantile striving for power, like Adler said. But he focused on their symbolic content and their compensatory role in the self-regulation of the psyche. They reveal aspects of oneself that are not normally conscious. They disclose unconscious motivations, operating in relations, and present points of view in conflict situations. In these regards, there are three possibilities. If a conscious attitude to life situation is in large degree one-sided, then the dream takes the opposite side. Think about how dreams follow the word of mouth here. If the conscious has a position fairly near the middle, the dream is satisfied with variations. If the conscious attitude is correct or adequate, then the dream coincides with and emphasizes this tendency, though without forfeiting its peculiar autonomy. In Jung's view, a dream is an interior drama. The whole dream work is essentially subjective, and a dream is a theater in which the dreamer is himself the scene, the player, the prompter, the producer, the author, the public, and the critic. So this conception gives rise to the interpretations of dreams on the subjective level. Gosh, we have people like Berakhot and others who, in ancient Jerusalem, predated Jungian analysis by, 1900 years. So again, the concept gives rise to the interpretation of dreams as a subjective level, where the images in them are seen as symbolic representations of elements in the dreamer's own personality. Interpretations on the objective level refer to the images to people and situations in the outside world. Many dreams have a classic dramatic structure. Alright, they can show place, time, or characteristics. They can show initial situations. Alright, there could be a development of a plot, there could be a culmination of or a climax, there could be a result or a solution, etc. In other words, it's an inner story. So, when you have someone who is accustomed to listening to symbols, they take a symbol and twist it and turn it to give it a meaning. Some can give it a meaning, positive or negative, based upon how much money you pay them. Now again, I might ask what might be considered the dumb question: why on earth would I even listen to anybody who had something bad to say, especially when I know that a dream can follow the mouth of the interpreter? Why would I listen to the, in quote, idiot who wants to say something bad? I had a dream last night that I saw the sun and the moon. Oh, you're dreaming about chocolate chip ice cream and pizza. What? Where did that come from? Well, alright, pizza, it's round like the sun. The moon is pot marked, so it's like chocolate chips. Now, that doesn't make any sense now, does it? But I'll give you an interesting little example. As you know, this is a live class, and I'm speaking right now off the top of my head. I don't have any notes in front of me. Why did I say pizza and chocolate chip ice cream and then make a relation to the sun and moon? Why did it even pop into my head to make that correlation? And then all of a sudden, I'm able to say pizza, round, chocolate chip ice cream, pockmark, moon. You see, even in my own mind when I speak, I recognize ahead of myself how my personal mind thinks. So when I say something, even without knowing why I'm saying it, I can just pause for a moment and I almost at the same time take a look within myself, visualize as if I could take my eyes from looking in out. I can turn them and look in and say, what was that? And I get an image flash in my head which tells me what it is. When it comes to dreams, this is kind of like what you have to do. So you see, the reason why Berakhot could give a dream interpretation is simply because people listened and believed. They ascribed to these individuals a power. They gave to them a strength of mind. Today we call it subliminal suggestion. It's almost as if you will a quantum reality. You remember what quantum realities are? Subatomic particles. They were always in a quandary because when they try to study subatomic particles, they realize that they can actually be in two different places at once. Well, you can have a dream which can have two different meanings at once, even one contradictory to the other. And then only when you observe the particle does it seem to take a finite place in space. And such, when you interpret the dream, does it take a finite interpretation and therefore materialize? Because the receiver is open to that form. Think of the dream content as the light and the interpretation as the vessel. Think of the dream as the soul and the interpretation as the body. For those of us who are willing to entertain the concept of reincarnation, how many bodies can a soul inhabit? Well, we believe in reincarnation, we could say many. An interpretation of a dream can materialize in many different forms. And because it comes from an unconscious realm which is fundamentally quantum in nature, the actual meaning of the dream can have various different applications, and not necessarily one specifically. That is why dreams are so confusing. Because ultimately, the dream is not just a conscious, rational, finite message like a telephone call, in which my unconscious mind wants to tell me, hey, if you wake up in time and go to Walmart tomorrow at 9 o'clock, you'll be there for a surprise sale and you'll be able to get one of those flat screen TVs at the price you've been looking for. I can interpret a dream like that, but that's never what a dream message is. In spite of the fact that my dream might be showing me either the sun or the moon, or pizza and chocolate chip ice cream. Remember how I just interpreted it? You, in your mind, could and would interpret it differently. Now, if you were to come to me for an interpretation of your dream, and many people do, I can go to the classical books of interpretations of dreams, available even in English. Jewish Dream Interpretation, Rabbi Almoli's book from the 16th, 17th century. It's available in English. You can get it through Amazon.com, especially if you would please order it through the link through KosherTorah, so you would help support us. But you will find that these are only subjective applications to different dreams and their meanings. This is what you must understand. That we are dealing here, even with books like that, with subjective, artistic, and relative interpretations, as opposed to objective, finite, and definitive answers. So if and when you see something in your dream, and you open up the book of classical dream interpretation, and it says, this symbol means this. And you could say, wow. Well, the only reason why you're saying wow and think that's true is because you believe it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what your dream is telling you. That might sound confusing, but no, it's not. The real way of understanding dreams requires the dream interpreter to truly have some type of insight into the individual with whom he is dealing. So, I do not believe that the 24 dream interpreters in Old Jerusalem, that the procedure was you'd walk in, you'd put down the money, say your dream, and without asking any questions or requiring any insight, the dream interpreter would then tell you the answer, and you take it and walk away. I don't think that's the way it was at all. I think there was a dialogue, I think there was questions, I think there was insight, because the dream interpreter is looking for, if you will, hooks to hang his interpretation on. And while that is not psychic phenomena, that's not fortune telling, that's not, any of this clairvoyance or anything, it is predated by 1900 years what psychology is. So ultimately, because the people were open, therefore the interpretation received, if you will, was like a seed in the mind which led to its ultimate fulfillment. So with this background and understanding into dreams, let's read now what the Talmud says. And I think we can understand it now within a greater psychological, and I emphasize again, non-mystical insight. The mind. I don't know, what is mysticism anyway, if not just another one of the many philosophies of life? The mind is not philosophy, it's real. Dreams are real. But what their reality is subject to the context of the reality of the world in which they exist. So, with regards to Baradia, it says here that if you paid him, he'd give you a good interpretation. If not, he wouldn't. So it says that Abaye and Rava each had a dream. Abaye gave him a zuz, but Rav did not give him any money. So they told him, in our dream, we had to read the verse, your ox will be slaughtered before your eyes, but you will not eat of it. Deuteronomy 20:31. To Rava, who did not pay him, he said, hey, your business is going to fail, and you're going to be so upset that you will have no appetite to eat. But to Abaye, who paid him, he said, your business will prosper, and you will be so overjoyed that you will not be able to eat. And they said to him, in our dream, we had to read the verse. All the nations of the world will realize that God's name is associated with you, and they will be afraid of you. Deuteronomy 28:10. To Abaye, he said, your name will be famous as the head of the yeshiva, and you will be greatly feared. But to Rava, the king's treasury will be broken into, and you will be arrested as a thief, and everyone will draw an inference from you, saying that if Rava is suspect, then surely we are too. And it says here that the next day the king's treasury was burglarized, and they came and arrested Rava. Then Rava went to him alone, and he said, hey, I dreamed that the outer door of my house fell off. So they asked, what is that? And he says, means your wife is going to die. Rava then said, I saw that my front and back teeth fell out. And he said, your sons and daughters will die. So I saw 2 pigeons flying. He says, you will divorce 2 wives. Notice everything, negative, negative, negative. And he said to him, I saw 2 turnip tops. He says, you will be hit 2 times with a stick. That day Rava went, and he sat all day in the Beit Midrash. He says, there were 2 blind people who were fighting with one another. Rava went to separate them, and they hit him twice. They wanted to hit him again, but Rava said, hey, 2 times is enough, because I saw in my dream, you're not going to hit me a 3rd time. So again, now let's ask the question. What on earth is going on here? Aside from the fact that this guy is really nasty and interpreted things bad, why is this recorded in the first place? Was Rava so desperate for a dream interpreter that he had to go to a guy who by definition is going to be nasty in his interpretations? No, of course not. I would take a wild guess that Rava himself, being as sage as he was, probably was pretty familiar with dream interpretation as it was. I think that the emphasis here is that our sages are trying to teach us this lesson of how the dream interpretations can be and are fluid and subjective in nature. And as we're going to... Well, let me move on here and we'll see. Finally, Rava gave Berakhot some money. And then he said to him, I dreamed that I saw the wall fall down. Remember that? And he goes, yeah, you're going to become very wealthy. Nothing will stand in your way. And he said to him, wait a second. In my dream, I saw my own house collapse. And everybody came and took a brick. And he said, your teachings will spread throughout the world. The opposite. Gee, what's going on? So Berakhot and Rava were once traveling together in a ship. So Berakhot said to himself, why should I go with a person to whom a miracle could happen? He says, if we're going to be in danger, he would be saved through a miracle, but not me. So Berakhot disembarked, and it says he dropped a book. And Rava found in it that it was written, all dreams go according to their interpretation. Apparently Rava didn't know this before. But nonetheless, Rava says, hey, wretch, everything depended on you, and you gave me all this suffering. Says, I will forgive you everything except what you said about my wife. Right? That he says Berakhot predicted her death. He says, may it be God's will that you fall into the hands of the government. They have no mercy on you. And then it says that Berakhot was executed by the Romans. They tied together 2 cedars with a rope, tied one of Berakhot's legs to one, and the other. Then they released it and ripped them down the center. And that's a nasty way to go. If there's any legitimate history to that, is irrelevant, because the ultimate lesson here is the moral of the story. Remember that we've covered throughout this entire series of the legends of the Talmud. The stories that our sages share are not necessarily history. In other words, this interaction with Bar Hidia may or may not be fiction. It's irrelevant. Because the historicity of the story does not add or detract from the point that our sages are trying to teach us. And that is, if you will, a parable, a lesson about how the nature of the mind is receptive to influence. Rava, when he became aware that a dream follows the interpretation, he was incensed. He cursed the guy. Why? Because Rava listened to him. Rava believed him. And because Rava listened and believed, he was therefore open to and subject to that influence. And that's what it's all about. Again, the nature of a true dream is that it is subjective. What's its real meaning? It could have many. So then what do? Well, this is something I discussed in the Dream Seminar, and I will reiterate it here. I encourage people to keep what is called a dream diary, wherein which you actually write down the imagery of your dream that you remember, because obviously there's a lot more that you forget, and we all know that. But what's important, rather than go into the interpretation of dream books and say that this symbol means this or that, rather than to do that, write down your feelings. So if you see yourself doing something in a dream, write down what you remember, and then write down how you felt at the moment. Okay? This is important. What are your feelings as you are interacting? Why is this important? Because, the unconscious does not communicate with us in a logical, rational, verbal way, but rather in an artistic, intuitive, subjective, pictorial way. So when the picture is shown us, it's not that the picture is to be interpreted within the context of the intellect, but rather how the picture is interpreted within the context of the heart. For example, the Gemara brings down, as does the Dream Interpretations books, that a man who has a dream and sees himself committing adultery should be certain that he has a portion in the world to come. And you would say, what? Adultery is a terrible evil. It's a crime. Person who does that causes such horror and pain. Certainly one would be punished. Why? In a dream, would it have a meaning the exact opposite of that which its rational application or meaning would be? And the books explain it real simply. Because, as we know, sin is always sweeter than that which is permitted. We can get away with the bad stuff. We go, woo, woo, woo. And we love it. Well, adultery, obviously, would be one of those sinful things. Woo, 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 the excitement thereof. So what the dream is showing you isn't what adultery is or isn't. It's irrelevant. The dream is trying to provoke within you the emotional experience of the heightened sensations and passions. Unfortunately, that we experience only with regards to sinful behavior. The dream is not addressing sinful or righteous behavior. It's trying to send us a symbol of the passion. And therefore, when you can recognize the nature of the passion, that's a symbol of connecting with heaven. And therefore to be interpreted as having a portion in the world to come. Now that is how it's interpreted. Now let's find some exceptions to the rule. Let's say you are a man or a woman, and you are having a dream of committing adultery with someone you know. Notice in the first example, I didn't say it was anybody you know. You'll find in the first example, it's usually committing adultery with a faceless individual. So therefore, it's generic as opposed to specific. But what now happens if you see yourself with somebody specific? Well, question number one. Obviously, is it somebody you've ever had fantasies about? If so, well, the tree might very well be that simple. Or, if not, it might be symbolic of when we look at the act of sexuality. Is this act of sexuality in your dream a desired, passionate, and enjoyable one? Or a detestable, gross, and disgusting thing? Again, we are looking at passion and enjoy, or disgusting and gross. The image is meant to solicit an emotional response, because that is the language of the unconscious. So therefore, the interpretation is vital in directing the mind what to believe. This is why, again, our sages are emphasizing these teachings. So, this is the examples given. Let's give some examples here. Ben Dama, who was the nephew of Rabbi Ishmael, once asked Rabbi Ishmael, "Hey, I dreamed that both my jaws fell off. What does it mean?" And he says, 2 Roman bands had a conspiracy against you, but they died. The jaw signified the mouth, which they plotted. And you have nothing to worry about. Now, you notice how he is making a correlation between jaw and mouth. Well, isn't what a mouth is, but what is a jaw? Especially when it says it fell off. It's the bone which is underlying, and the bone obviously is not a symbol of a full speaking mouth, but a skeleton, dead. Which means that which came from the jaw or the speech itself was dead. Why 2? Well, it says that's why he says 2 bands spoke against you, but they're a skeleton, they're a bone, they died. An abstract. Now, is this true? Were there really 2 bands out there that were after Ben Dama? We don't know. We're just giving an example of how such a thing can be interpreted. Berakhot said to Rabbi, "I dreamed that my nose fell off." And he replied, "Fierce anger. A hostile decree has been removed from you." If you remember, the word af, nose in Hebrew, is also a word for anger. So if it says your nose fell off, it means your anger has been removed. Or anger has been removed from you. Then he said, "I dreamed that both my hands were cut off." And he replied, "You won't need your hands anymore to earn a livelihood." And he said, "I dreamed that both my legs were cut off." He says, "You will ride comfortably on horseback." Again, emphasis that you don't need your hands. Notice he interpreted it positively. You don't need your legs, and he interpreted it positively. Did any of this come true? Well, you'll notice that the language of the Gemara does not follow up with us to give us those insights. Rabbi Hanan said there are 3 kinds of dreams that symbolize peace. A dream about a river, a bird, or a pot. A river, because it says, "I will extend to her prosperity like a stream," Isaiah 66:12. A bird, because it says, "Like the birds that fly, so will the Lord of hosts protect Jerusalem," Isaiah 31:5. And a pot, God will ordain peace for us. The word to ordain is tishpot, means he will ordain, which also means putting a pot on a fire. So therefore it's a reference to the pot. Now here is a traditional, classical Jewish way that any symbol that is applied in the dream is applied to a verse of scripture that speaks about such a symbol, such as, again, the river, a bird, or a pot. And therefore they will apply to it the verse of scripture, usually a positive one, and express an interpretation within that context. Now that is a very lovely and a beautiful, but in my opinion, superficial way of interpreting a dream. And yet, do not be dissuaded by the superficiality of it to say, well, I want something really deep. Sometimes, even though you say that, no, you don't. Sometimes your mind craves something simple, a sense of reassurance, an emotional hug, stroke, or the like. This is what you got to pay attention to. Again, the emotional content. So thus, when you are keeping your dream journal, your dream diary, and I saw in my dreams, flying elephants and pizzas in the sky and chocolate chip ice cream in the moon, what did that make you feel like? Well, let me ask you this. For example, I confess, one of my favorite foods is pizza. One of my favorite ice creams is chocolate chip. So therefore, when pizza pops up into my mind, the image, yummy, yummy. Chocolate chip ice cream, smooth. Okay? My mind starts to activate. Say to me, however, broccoli, collard greens. Might as well be having a busy signal. Does not connect. There's no emotional content there. So therefore, if in my dream I was to see something that I have no relationship to, it would be a meaningless symbol. And therefore, as I do explore and keep my dream journals, it is very, very rare, and I honestly cannot even think of one example in which I've seen a symbol which did not in some way strike an emotional chord within me. Even if that emotional chord was simple curiosity. I've seen imageries in my dreams which have caught my attention because they're so radically weird that it almost activates within me a seek and understand mentality in the dream. I recognize this. That is something that my mind is trying to provoke me to look deeper, to go deeper. And even in the dream to try to understand that. So this is the way and means that these things can happen. Okay. The Gemara continues. It states here, Rabbi Yochanan said, if when you wake up, a biblical verse comes to mind, it's kind of a minor prophecy. Oh, this is a very important one. When you wake up, the first thought in your mind is the last thought of the dream. It's as if the dream or your unconscious mind or your soul or your higher self's last chance to get something into consciousness. So therefore, you should always pay attention to the first thought that's in your mind as you wake up. I've noticed many a time that first thought is meant to be, if you will, like a access, a key to something deeper. I'll share with you something of my own techniques and personality here. As you know, I practice the meditational teachings that I've taught here in KosherTorah for the last 20 years. And I can go to sleep or have a dream and then wake up from my dream, half remembering, half not the symbols, but having some deep sense of meaning in my mind at the moment that I awake. So, when I awake, it's always in the early morning hours, I will do all the regular rituals that are obligatory upon us, and then I sit back to meditate. In other words, I've come into the conscious world, and now with that little bit of inkling left, I go back into the unconscious. I go back into the meditation, using that which I remember, the feeling, as if you will, an emotional trigger to direct me into my meditative state. What technique do I use to meditate with? Anyone and everyone. Doesn't matter. There's no rhyme or reason. Just do what works at the moment. That's why I've taught so many different systems. They are like different strokes of an artist's brush. Different instruments that are played in the orchestra. There's not one that's better than the other, more right than the other. Each one is what it is. So as I would go then into a meditative state, following an emotional component, I notice in my now conscious meditative mind, I can get a sense and a feeling of my body falling away. I can get a sense and a feeling of floating in the air, flying, or traveling in what looks like a wormhole. I could see myself popping into different places, and I see different pictures. And just the time data, now it's around the Passover, just after the Passover season 2013. And I recently came out with 2 of such visions that I wrote about on KosherTorah.com. And you go look them up online. They should still be there. Obviously, I'm speaking to a future rather than the present, because right now they still are, and hopefully they will be in the future. But my point is, this is how the technique works. And I see in my mind images, pictures. And as I'm looking at the picture, it is as if I understand exactly what it is that I'm looking at. As it is as if that I'm hearing a voice in my head saying, this is this, and this is that, and this is what it means. This is where you fit in. This is why you're being shown this. And some of these things are just so fundamental, so basic, primary, that I feel compelled that I'm meant to share these things publicly, and these are the things that I write about and put on KosherTorah.com. And I emphasize, these things are, if you will, poetry in motion. These are not rational, logical communications from beyond. They are not prophecy. They are indeed visions. And again, a skeptic is going to say, it's all in your mind. But of course! But the one thing about my mind is that it is certainly, definitely not limited to my brain. And as my mind expands through the universe, I touch things in the universe. I see things in the universe. I experience them. And I feel compelled that it's my teleological destiny to share these things with the hope and the prayer that they may be of assistance to those who read them. And indeed, judging from all the emails I get and the hits we get on the website, that apparently somebody's paying attention. And that's the way it is. That's the way these things work. Now, in the section here, the section continues and gives all kinds of meanings. That this image is interpreted to mean this. It has books of the Bible, different kings, and each one is given an interpretation based upon a context within biblical experience and literature. These are general applications, general interpretations. And they can indeed mean, as it's written here, or it can mean something very different. It all depends on the dreamer, the mind of the dreamer, the circumstances of the dreamer, and the circumstance of the experience of the dream. So this is why when you send me an email, say, I had a dream and I saw ABC. What does it mean? What do you want me to tell you? I have to ask you the questions. I have to ask about the emotional triggers. I have to get to know you. I have to have some insights into who and what you are as an individual, so that I can begin to understand how your mind is operating, to understand the subjective nature of the imagery that your mind is popping up. Maybe I can understand your unconscious mind better than you can understand your conscious mind. Maybe. Let me rephrase that. Maybe I can understand your unconscious better than your conscious mind can understand your unconscious. I try. Many times I'm good at it. Just as many, maybe not. But this is what real dream interpretation is all about. Now you might say, well, a good analyst who understands dream interpretations can do the same thing. And the answer is, by all means he can. She can. Absolutely. Because again, we're dealing here with the psyche. Now what about holiness? And what about the unclean? Well, that all depends again on the nature of the individual as well. What about external influences from angels or demons? Or the higher self is still part of you. Other than that, well, there are those influences too. And there are ways and means to discern them, sift them out, to experience and to recognize and understand. And we've covered those in other places. But in brief, I want you to walk away from this class holding your dreams in respect and recognizing they are not to be dismissed and ignored. That they are messages for you to help you understand your destiny, your fate, your walk in life. And if you take my advice and keep this dream diary, dream journal, with emphasis on your emotional component, you indeed can come to glean insight into your own inner workings, your own inner nature, and thus cultivate a sensitivity to your own intuitiveness. And this is how we develop and build what's called clairvoyant, telepathic, psychic powers. This is how we connect what we call Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Divine Spirit within. So on that note, God be willing, let's conclude. I hope I've answered more questions that I've raised. And God be willing, I'll see you all in our next class. Thank you again all for joining me. I'm your host, Ariel Bar Tzadok. Come and see me online. And please don't forget to support KosherTorah through your generosity. Thanks again. God bless. Shalom. 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 Thanks again.